Hi, boys and girls. I'm your Peter Pan storyteller. And when you hear this sound, turn the page. Now let's read along together. Zorro Hunts a Jackal by Johnston McCulley. One hot and dusty afternoon in the town of Reina de Los Angeles, Don Diego Vega, a well-known aristocrat of the region, went down to the inn in search of a friend. But not finding him there, he started to talk with the innkeeper, only to be interrupted by loud shrieks and sounds of a whip striking against bare human flesh. Someone was beating one of the natives with a whip. The innkeeper told Don Diego Vega that the man with the whip was a strange horse dealer who had come to the pueblo just a few days before. He then spoke of a certain Senor Zorro who had become famous. He said,
"If Zorro would ride the highways once more, this man might be properly punished. This man who beats natives is a swindler. He purchases stolen animals from natives, gives them a small part of what he promises, and then compels them to gamble or play cards with him, and wins back the little he has paid, undoubtedly through some trick."
Don Diego stepped outside and strolled forward towards the horse trader. "What is all this about?" he asked. The man with the whip whirled about to face him.
"And who is questioning me?"
he demanded. "Don Diego Vega, senor. A man to be treated with the utmost respect."
"Ah, your pardon, Don Diego."
"What is your name and your business?" Don Diego asked.
"I am Felipe Garzo, and I deal in horses."
"And do you break and train the beasts, senor?"
"It is indeed labor for a man of strength, Don Diego. I am hoping to sell some to Capitan Ramon of the Presidio for the use of his troopers."
"You appear to be quite handy with a whip, senor." Don Diego turned away and walked up the path. He soon came upon the retired pirate Barboso, who pretended to be reformed. "I have just witnessed a disgraceful brawl on the other side of the plaza," said Don Diego.
"I saw the disturbance, Don Diego. It seems that the horse dealer, Felipe Garzo, loves to swindle natives and beat them. I have thought about him, Don Diego. I think that fellow is a jackal."
"Ah, and who is the lion for whom he finds prey?"
"Capitan Ramon, the commanding officer at the Presidio, and the governor's representative here in Reino de Los Angeles."
"Is he the lion? Interesting," Don Diego commented.
"It is well known that Capitan Ramon is eager to capture or kill Senor Zorro. There is a reward offered by the governor, but how can Capitan Ramon capture or slay Senor Zorro if Zorro remains in hiding?"
"I am quite sure it would be impossible," Don Diego said. "In order to capture him, something must happen to make Zorro want to ride again. So the jackal comes to town, beats and swindles natives, a thing likely to bring Zorro out into the open."
"Let us assume,"
said Barboso,
"that if Senor Zorro wishes to punish Garzo, he will discover that he is dealing with an expert swordsman. Zorro could die on the point of his blade. If Zorro wins, others will be waiting about to capture him."
"A pretty plot," Don Diego said, yawning. Don Diego then began to set a plan in motion. He asked Barboso to obtain a special chemical for him and to bring it to his house at nightfall. Barboso agreed. Don Diego walked out into the night. Jose of the Cocopas, a well-known giant native, stood with bowed head as Don Diego approached, and out of the corner of his mouth, Don Diego whispered the ominous words, "Zorro rides tonight. The Hacienda Trail." Back at the Presidio, the troopers were eating and attending to their duties. In his private quarters, Capitan Ramon spoke in low tones with Felipe Garzo.
"He took the bait,"
Felipe Garzo was saying.
"I grabbed the native in front of the door of the inn and beat him soundly so that Don Diego could not fail to hear and see."
"I feel certain that he is Senor Zorro,"
the captain said.
"If we win in this, Felipe, our fortunes are made. If Don Diego is unmasked as Zorro, His Excellency will be well pleased."
"And what do we do now?"
Felipe Garzo asked.
You will sleep in the guest house as usual. Zorro may come to punish you during the night. 3 troopers will be on guard and within call. If he comes, help will be near at hand if you should need it.
Capitan Ramon said. There was then a tap on the door, and the Capitan gave permission to enter.
Don Diego Vega to see the Capitan,
said one of the troopers.
Ah, Don Diego Vega!
Capitan Ramon stood up, bowing as Don Diego stepped through the door. Your pardon, Capitan Ramon, for this intrusion, Don Diego said. I must ride out to the Pulido place to make a social call.
Ah, and you desire an escort?
The Capitan put in.
You may surely have one. There are highwaymen and cutthroats abroad these nights.
If I may have that big sergeant of yours, Pedro Garcia, it will please me.
I'll issue the order immediately, Don Diego, and Sergeant Garcia will be ready as soon as he can saddle his horse.
Later, Don Diego Vega and Sergeant Pedro Garcia rode along the dusty highway. I am grateful to you for riding with me tonight, said Don Diego Vega. I am compelled to go to the Pulido Hacienda for a time. They went along a winding road until they came to the Pulido house. Don Diego dismounted and handed his reins to the sergeant. Take my mount along with your own, he said. When I am ready to return to Reina de Los Angeles, I'll send a servant for you. Then, after checking to make sure that no one was at home in the big house, Don Diego skipped down the slope, stopping beside a narrow trail. He gave a low whistle. Is it you, Jose?
Si, senor.
Is everything prepared?
Yes, senor. Behind the brush.
Don Diego Vega removed his garments and quickly put on others instead. Across his face, he fastened a black mask with slits for the eyes. A blade was strapped at his side. He dropped down behind a big rock, and there was a sudden flare as Jose kindled a small torch into flame. Don Diego took something from a small bottle, propped a mirror against the rock, and worked diligently for a time. The horse?
10 paces straight ahead, senor.
You will remember everything.
Everything, senor.
I must go. Put out the torch. Zorro rides! As he spoke, he draped his form with a long black cloak of thin material and darted forward to where a black horse was waiting. Down the narrow trail he went through the soft night. He turned into the highway and rode swiftly toward the town. His eyes gleamed through the slits in the mask he wore. He played a dangerous game. One fatal slip and shame would descend upon the Vegas, and the jealous governor would have his moment of gloating. Zorro only struck to aid the oppressed and to right the many wrongs. Yet he did indeed act outside of the law. He kept the black cloak wrapped closely around his body as he crept through the fringe of brush on the gulch's rim. His black mask covered his entire face. Zorro approached the guest house. He crouched silently behind a tree. He could see 3 lurking guards not far from the guest house. Silently, Senor Zorro crept toward them. He waited for the proper moment, and then he whipped off his cloak and stepped from behind the tree. The troopers sprang to their feet and glanced around quickly. In the midst of the blackness of the night, they saw a skull and a chest of a skeleton. The skeleton approached them, gleaming.
Deus!
One cried. Their shrieks of fear rang out. They retreated toward the barracks, howling for their comrades to bring blazing torches. Through the night, Zorro rushed noiselessly to the corner of the guest house, and from there watched the door. Almost instantly, the door was hurled open. Senor Garzo stood partly clothed, holding a flaming torch above his head with his left hand, a naked blade in his right.
What is it?
He shouted. The guards rushed across the patio to the corner of the barracks, where a door had been opened for them. Capitan Ramon demanded order in silence. Felipe Garzo rushed across the patio, carrying his sword and his torch. Quickly, Zorro slipped through the door into the big room, where he hid in a huge wardrobe. He kept the door half open, so that he was able to see across the room and into the patio.
It was a fiery skeleton.
One of the guards kept repeating.
A skeleton with flaming bones.
And where did you see it first?
Asked the Capitan.
Over there, by the tree. It seemed to be floating through the air at us.
It probably came out of this empty wine jug I find here on the ground.
The Capitan insinuated.
But we all saw at the same time, Capitan. It was a terrible thing.
What do you think, Garzo?
The Capitan asked.
That you have some strange troopers, Capitan.
Garzo replied.
A flaming skeleton that screeched? There's nobody here.
Capitan Ramon whirled upon his men.
Idiots and cowardly fools! Who ever saw a flaming skeleton shriek? Why, has robbed you of whatever wits you possessed, and perhaps it has also ruined our plans for the night. Return to your post.
Are we to continue the watch?
Guard asked.
You are, though probably it will come to nothing now.
Ramon remained with Felipe Garzo at the door of the guest room. By the light of their torches, they could view the interior. They saw nothing unusual, for Zorro has by this time closed the door of the wardrobe.
What do you make of it, Capitan?
I scarcely know, senor.
The guards were badly frightened.
They are a superstitious lot.
Now, boys and girls, turn the recording over and continue.
It is yet early in the night. Perhaps the man we expect will still arrive.
I doubt it.
The Capitan said.
Zorro strikes when men least expect.
He stalked away in a rage, and Felipe Garzo closed the door of the guest house and walked across to his bed. He surveyed the room an instant, then pushed the head of the torch into a bowl of sand to extinguish it, plunging the room into total darkness. Garzo stretched out upon the couch, half-dressed, and reached down to pull the protecting quilt of skins up to his chin. Suddenly, he gave a gasp of surprise, for there, on the adobe wall of the room, in quivering, shining letters, was the one word, Muerte. And below it was a big, jagged letter Z. Death, the sign of Zorro. Felipe Garzo sprang out of bed and feverishly kindled the torch. The light flared up, and Garzo gave a sigh of relief to find that Senor Zorro was not standing before him. He returned to the couch. As he extinguished the torch, the letter and the sign flashed out on the wall again.
It is some trick, such as was played on the guards.
Felipe Garzo fought with himself to remain calm, to keep from lighting the torch and making a fresh investigation. Inside the wardrobe, Senor Zorro was growing cramped and uncomfortable. He opened the door of the closet a couple of inches, looked out into the darkness of the room, and listened. Felipe Garzo was sleeping fitfully on his bed. Zorro opened the door wider and finally stepped down to the floor, closing the door of the wardrobe behind him slowly and noiselessly. His long, dark cloak was wrapped closely around him, covering him from head to foot. As he stood against the wall, he could not be seen. All at once, he dropped the cloak to the floor and began to speak. "You, who call yourself Felipe Garzo, you are an impostor, a jackal, a decoy. So you would trap and trick Senor Zorro, eh?" The perspiration stood out on Felipe Garzo's forehead. That word on the wall seemed to dance before his eyes. He had not yet observed the stranger. Felipe Garzo sprang from the couch, making a wild grab for his sword and dagger. Across the room, Felipe Garzo beheld what the guards had seen, the upper half of a skeleton in gleaming, quivering light. And from that direction came also a soft, mocking laugh, and a sound much as that made by a blade being drawn from a scabbard. Felipe Garzo reached for the torch and tried to kindle it into flame. As the light flared up, there was a quick step on the other side of the room. He whirled about, and there he saw a man in dark clothing, with a black mask across his face, and on the forehead of the mask, a ragged letter Z.
Zorro!
Felipe Garzo gasped. "At your service, beater of natives, swindler, cheat, thief!" Garzo backed to the wall, stooped swiftly, and retrieved his dagger, which had fallen to the floor in all the excitement.
This shall be the end of you, Zorro.
He hissed.
In a moment, senor, I shall strip off your mask and have a look at your dead face.
"On guard, senor!" Zorro said. They met, clashed, and at the first encounter, Zorro knew that here was an experienced swordsman. "Beater of natives!" Zorro taunted. "Jackal for the Capitan and the Governor!" Around and around the room they fought, each trying to get the advantage over the other. Outside, the guards heard them as they listened at the door and beneath one of the windows. They knew that there were sounds of fighting which came from inside. Yet they were loath to enter and disturb and gain a rebuke if they were in error.
Go to the Capitan and tell him.
One ordered, and a comrade rushed away. Garzo's strength was leaving him rapidly. He has met his match in the duel. Fear of death came to him, and also the fear that this man might escape after having slain him. Suddenly, Zorro's blade darted into it like a snake's tongue, and Felipe Garzo felt a streak of fire across his cheek.
Three strokes for all the world to see, always. You will not have to tell them with whom you have fought.
Felipe Garzo felt another streak of flame. Blood trickled down his cheek from the wound.
The last stroke is a delicate matter,
Zorro said.
I like to join the scratches so that the letter Z will be perfect. And after having marked you...
The sentence was left unfinished, but Garzo's imagination ran on.
Help! Guards! Zorro is here!
He shouted.
Coward!
Zorro hissed. As he spoke, his blade darted forward again, and the letter Z was now completed. Felipe Garzo darted back against the wall to make his last desperate stand. The guards were pounding at the door, howling to know whether they should enter.
Help! Zorro is here!
Felipe Garzo's last cry strangled in his throat. Zorro's blade flashed again and came back red. He had not struck to kill, but only to give wound that would bring unconsciousness. For if, as Zorro believed, this horse trader was a proud swordsman of the governor's retinue, to go through life shamed with Zorro's brand would be a sterner lesson to him and to others like him than a swift and painless death. Zorro whirled away as he heard the voice of Capitan Ramon. From his pouch he took the little bottle, and for a time worked swiftly at the wall and on the face of the fallen man. An instant later he had darted across the room and had extinguished the torch, and grasping his long black cloak, he enveloped himself in it. Then he darted to the big door and stood so it would hide him when it was hurled open. The next moment it crashed in. The room was in total blackness. The guards who carried torches had not yet reached the building. When they finally opened the door, they were terrified, for gleaming on the opposite wall was a huge skull. Across it, a jagged letter Z. And on the floor in a corner was a form that might have been a man. On it was another Z that quivered in the darkness. The Capitan stormed in with the others, carrying blazing torches. Their first swift glances revealed no sign of Zorro. Since they had all rushed past him, Senor Zorro, who was behind the door, prepared to rush into the night. His work was not yet done. He had punished Felipe Garzo, but he had also to disabuse the Capitan of the idea that Senor Zorro was indeed Don Diego Vega. "You look for me, perhaps?" he called out to the guards. They whirled about, and in that instant he darted through the door and was gone, his mocking laugh ringing back at them.
After him!
Ramon cried.
Get the horses for a chase!
The men ran out in the direction of Zorro, guided by his mocking laugh. He listened quietly as the troopers charged toward the stables. The horses were always ready for the trail. At the Presidio, Capitan Ramon mounted his horse. Past them rode a figure who howled at them as he passed. The flaming upper part was a skeleton again, for Zorro had not put on his cloak. Troopers gave cries of alarm, but their Capitan silenced them.
It is Zorro! After him! A reward to the man who catches or slays him!
Zorro increased his speed a little, gradually increasing the distance between himself and the enemy. They swept after him around long curves in the road. After riding at top speed for some time, Zorro stopped at the edge of a sea of brush. He sprang out of the saddle, and Jose of the Cocoa Pods sprang into it. The black horse started again, and the ringing hoofs gave signal to those behind. Crouching in the brush, Zorro watched them ride furiously past, chasing Jose, who had a way of losing them. Then Zorro rushed along a little trail and came to the spot where he had left his clothes. Swiftly he stripped off the Zorro costume and then, laying aside his mask and blade, donned the clothing of Don Diego Vega. The Zorro costume, streaked with phosphorus, was hidden beneath a rock where Jose would get it later. Don Diego hurried, approaching the great house of the Politos cautiously. He went up to the front door and knocked. A servant opened to him, and he strode across a wide room to find Don Carlos Polito.
Don Diego, at this hour, is there something amiss?
Why, no, senor, Don Diego said, and yawned. 2 or 3 hours ago, I came to your fine house to make you a visit of courtesy and to talk with the father of my betrothed. Don't you remember?
What is this?
We have been talking of politics all this while, and I have been very bored. I am just now leaving, senor. I came with the big Sergeant Garcia for my escort. Will you have the kindness to send a servant and tell the sergeant to bring my horse to the front?
Certainly, Don Diego.
And he clapped his hands for the servant. Don Diego Vega mounted his horse, waved to his host, and rode off toward the main road that ran to Reina de Los Angeles. But what is this we have ahead? Don Diego demanded as he saw a group of horsemen with lighted torches approaching. Garcia gasped and whipped out his blade.
Troopers.
Garcia said, and sighed relief. He had expected to fight a band of highwaymen in defense of Don Diego Vega's proud and wealthy person. And what can they be doing here? Don Diego asked. The troopers heard them and rushed toward them with their lighted torches held high in the air. What is all this? Don Diego asked the Capitan. Capitan Ramon was suspicious of Don Diego Vega, but a man had to have more than mere suspicion when he confronts one of the mighty Vega family.
We have been chasing Zorro.
The Capitan said.
He came to the Presidio and attacked the horse trader.
The fellow who beats natives?
The same.
Ramon replied.
You have been to the Pulido Hacienda?
Yes, now I am eager to get home to bed. The troopers made way for him, and he rode forward. Capitan Ramon rode his mount beside that of the sergeant and asked him,
What has this Don Diego been doing?
He visited in the big house.
His horse?
I cared for the entire time.
Capitan Ramon spurred forward to a place beside Don Diego Vega again.
This Zorro marked the horse trader.
He said,
Carved his accursed letter on the fellow's cheek.
Capitan, you are a commanding officer under the governor for this district. It is your duty to catch or slay this Zorro and put an end to the turmoil. Why do you not do so? Capitan Ramon really had no answer.
Un cavalier qui surgit hors de la nuit court vers l'aventure au galop. Son nom, il le signe à la pointe de l'épée, d'un Z qui veut dire Zorro. Zorro, Zorro, renard rusé qui fait sa loi. Zorro, Zorro, vainqueur, tu les as chaque fois. Zorro.